Hello and welcome back. So, in my last Sandbox episode, I showed you a design for a research bus. And that research bus assumed that all the materials were being made somewhere and just produced for the bus to consume. This is the area that makes all the consumables. The idea was to just put in fairly raw ingredients, so plates, steel, that sort of thing, and then produce all the things that were needed for the research bus, plus a bit of an excess so that you could feed into a bit of manufacturing, make some drones, that sort of thing. So what I did in the Sandbox was design each component individually, not on any kind of backbone, just with the inputs and outputs plumbed directly into the creative mode matter producers and voiders. Once I'd done that and I was happy with each of the individual components, I then put them onto a bus backbone. And I followed the same sort of design as before. So the individual lanes are 4 wide, where they are the same material. I'm using the Hazard concrete going in the same direction. Where they're different materials, the Hazard concrete swaps direction. So that's pretty much what's going on there. Bricks to separate out. So the brick is to give a visual cue about where the underground skips should go. Then there is a skirt at the top with the drone ports in, and a skirt at the bottom with drone ports, and then it turned out to be kind of easier to put the fluid bus below the bottom skirt. So that's it really. So the bus has the materials coming in from iron at the top down to the outputs near the bottom. So let's first of all look at green circuits. So the idea here was to produce a nearly full 2 lanes of green circuits. This is completely overkill for the research area, but an excess of green circuits is always useful. There's always something they are needed for. So this is reasonably well ratioed. So it takes 3 lines of copper in and 2 lines of iron, and produces almost 2 lines of green circuits. It's quite a short build compared to a lot of people's in their factories, particularly their sort of megabase belt-only factories. The reason for this is that I'm not consuming these green belts to make either the red or the blue circuits. So these are purely for consumption later on for making things. So it's a fairly straightforward build. We put in a full line of copper each side that gets fed into the first few machines. Then we put in 1 line of copper which gets split in 2, and that becomes the merge line. And it turns out that if I merge after each cassette, that seems to work fine. I did play around with trimming off the second copper line part way up. I could never quite get that to balance. I don't know. It seems to work better to have 2 and just let it get on with merging, and it can buffer up the second belt. So that's pretty much it for green circuits. Nothing really to see there. But let's have a look at the bus. So we're consuming 2 full lines of iron, and I just unashamedly consume 2 lines of iron. And then we're consuming 3 lines of copper, and again, I'm just unashamedly pulling off those 3 lines of copper. You can see they're very slightly stalling. These are very slightly stalling. You know, all of those stalls would not fill even half a belt, so it's really not worth the effort trying to balance them over. So the next build is red circuits, and so back of the envelope calculations said I needed quite a few red circuit machines, I think 90 odd. So 6, 12, 18, 24. So there's 24 in a block, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's 96 if I can add up. that's 96 red circuit makers, which produces not quite a full red belt. So the belt, by the time it's, let's go down here where you can actually see it. Yeah, so the belt down here is about 3/4 full. If I put another red circuit cassette up the top, I'm guessing that would saturate the red belt. So how do these work? Well, they take in one line of copper for each cassette. Then they take in one split line of iron and plastic. I've done the same thing as before, where I've used combinators to mark the inputs and also the lanes. I just find it much easier to do it that way. And also in the cases where it's important which lane materials are on, this is just a visual cue which way around you should have wired it. So this split lane of plastic and iron comes in here. The iron is consumed by the green circuit machines, and the plastic is consumed by the red circuit machines, and that's fine. The copper, there's copper that goes across into the coils for the green circuits, and then there's also a coil maker which feeds 6 red circuit machines. So this is why the ratios are slightly hinky. This is why we've got 4 lanes of copper and effectively 2 lanes of iron and 2 of plastic. We have a slight excess of copper, so the copper doesn't flow at quite full speed. So if we look at these belts here, it's going reasonably well. If you look at the plastic, you can see the plastic is not fully consuming 2 lines of plastic. And similarly, it's not consuming quite 2 lines of iron. So this is a good candidate where I could have taken the overflow of this iron and pushed it in somewhere else. So I potentially have half a lane of iron in hand here, or going on for that. Okay, so after the red circuits, we have blue circuits. And the blue circuit build, again, is a cassette with the green circuits made locally. So if you run the numbers, if you have no productivity mods, one green circuit machine provides all the circuits you need to run one blue circuit machine. Now, if you try doing this on belts, so that you're putting in a belt of greens to feed into a whole row of blues, you just don't have the belt capacity. You end up with crazy builds where you have things like a full belt of green and then a split green-red. By making them locally, there's just no issue. And it goes from being a build which is, really bottlenecked by getting the green circuits in on belts to something where none of these belts are really running at full capacity. So we belt in the red circuits. They are split off from the red circuits we made earlier. And you can see there's plenty of capacity. So even when we split this off, we still have red circuits on that line. And that's more than enough left over to drive the red circuit needs for our research bus. So incoming red line is split because we don't use very much for each line of blues. And it's split again and again. So we've got 3 of these cassettes. The iron is brought in on 3 lines, and they are 3 dedicated lines. And again, the copper is brought in on 3 lines, and that's 3 dedicated lines. Now, the eagle-eyed among you will have noticed that the ratios here are way off. It should be 3 of copper to 2 of iron. So I have an entire belt's worth of capacity here that's not quite being consumed. I tried various things where I brought in 2 belts and then applied splitters within this upright copper and iron bus, and I could not get enough material in. Something to do with how the splitting was happening. It just wasn't splitting well enough. So it turned out to be easier to run the 3 lines in. And you've just got that overcapacity. So again, we've probably got a between half a line and a line of iron plates which are not being used here. So add that to the 1/2 to 1 earlier. We've got 1 or 2 extra iron lanes in this build. So we'll get back to that in a minute. Once you've made circuits, the next consumable I need is engines, the bog standard ones. So this is a very simple build. We take in iron plates, we make gears and pipes. We then take in a line of steel. The steel pipes and gears are consumed by the engine machines and they get spat out. There is definitely more engine machines here than you need. I think it's either 4 or 8 extras. That's to provide capacity for things like making trains and pumps. Also, it allowed me to produce an excess of electric engines, and that's actually enough to build a drone every 1/2 second to second, give or take. So these engines come out all the way to the bottom of the bus. Then we're going to make our electrics. So for that, we want a line of green circuits and engines. So we've got green circuits on the bus now. We've got engines on the bus. We just take out a split. And I've just taken it off here. I've not even bothered to balance these because I'm assuming this would then go on to something else which did some kind of bus rerouting to adapt this production bus to the research bus. So anyway, split line in, and then we get electric engines out, and of course we have lube for this. So we've got lube and sulfuric acid on the fluid bus. I've tried to keep the undergrounds even. So for example, where I took off sulfuric acid here for the blue circuits, I put in a couple of overground pipes to synchronize it back up again. I know it's not necessary, but I just find that's easier to keep track of. And then this dead ends, I just let it dead end, this dead ends. So I'm not putting the other underground on here because we're not continuing these fluids on. And then the very last thing we make is batteries. So here are 8 battery making machines. I think we need 4 or 5, possibly 6 for research. We need 2 or 3, possibly 4 for making drones. So that's fine. That is all the stuff we need. So those get shoved down to the bottom of the bus. And you can see all our outputs are at the bottom down here. So we've got 2 lines of green, one partial of red, one partial of blue. Then we've got a partial of engines, electric engines, and batteries. So none of these belts are really full or fully compressed or anything close. It's kind of interesting to look at the sheer volume of material we have put in. So we've got for 8 lines of iron plates, we think we might be able to get away with 6. We have put in 4, 8, 11 lines of copper plates. I think we can get away with 10 clearly, possibly 9, I'm not sure. We've got 2 lines of plastic, and I think we're using about 1.5 of those, and a dribble of steel. And all of this material produces this tiny trickle of product. Before I'd seen it, I didn't really quite believe it, but this is the amount of material compression you get by doing the manufacturing. Anyway, so as I say, you could probably improve this by dropping out 1 or 2 lanes and doing some balancing on this bus of the plates. I'm not going to bother because this would be fed upstream by probably a train, and the train carriages would do the buffering and balancing quite happily. Or you'd be doing it from a big smelting array, and 1 extra smelter here or there makes no difference when you're doing this many smelters, because you need 1 smelter for each input plate. You'd need 1, perhaps 2 steel smelters to keep that going. So yeah, so what have I learned from this? This kind of scale of build, it's a absolute hog for resources, and when you're doing it all in one place, it's going to be a tiling the world with smelters type of thing to actually get enough stuff processed. And it's kind of pushing me towards thinking that outposting is the sensible way to go for any reasonable build. We could halve the size of this by halving the research rate. So I did pick a slightly high research rate of 2 potions a second. I normally do 1 potion a second. And if you did that, you'd be down to sticking 4 lanes of iron in rather than 8. You'd be down to needing maybe 6 lines of copper instead of 11 or 12. But you still wouldn't be down to a 4-4 bus. Anyway, that's me for today. I'm going away on a holiday now, so I will be back in the new year. So there won't be anything else from me until in the new year. I'll probably be starting a new game when I get back, so there probably won't be any more sandboxing for a little while, but we'll see. Well, hope you enjoyed this. Have fun.